Hello, beautiful soul. Thank you for being here and joining me today for this chat and channel session dedicated to navigating grief during the holidays or during times of wintering in your life. Really, if you are someone who's going through grief or perhaps still carrying it from an earlier time, I find that the holidays can be especially difficult to navigate. Whether that is the holidays that we have in the last months of the year, or whether that be any holiday or any time of year for you, because of the fact that the times that we are used to being with our loved ones or used to having them around or feel that they should be around to celebrate with us can bring back memories and bring back layers of grief that we didn't even know that we had, no matter how fresh the wound is of a loved one's passing. I also want to talk about how we can be navigating grief whether or not we've actually lost loved ones. Remember that we can grieve anything, and our souls and bodies do grieve for us when we lose other things in life as well. If we've lost opportunities, if we've lost situations, jobs, other forms of relationship, whether the people have passed away or not, or if we are mourning the loss of something that we wanted that didn't come to fruition, all of these can promote grief. And during the holidays especially, it can be difficult to deal with this emotion and to feel like people understand where you're coming from. Because of the fact that this is known, so commercially as the most wonderful time of the year, it can be difficult sometimes, I find, for people to understand that not everyone is going to be in the same mood, is going to be in the same attitude, or is going to be capable of celebrating in the same way as expected, or maybe as they did previous to the griefs or losses that they've experienced. So with that being said, I just want to pause for a moment and say, if you are new here, welcome. My name is Danielle, #damsel at D's Enlightened Edits of damseldesigns.com. I am a spiritual advisor, psychic medium, quantum channel, energy healer, life coach, and energy artist. And in these chat and channel sessions, my guides, or in some cases, some of you, present me with a topic, and we have a stream of consciousness channeling on it. You can feel free to take part in the chat portion by leaving a comment or a question for me. I will do my best to get back to you. And I also invite you to utilize the opportunity of this session to get out a journal or your favorite notes app on your phone or another device and do some stream of consciousness writing along with me. Because of the way that my guides and I work, these chat and channel sessions have the possibility to be activating for you to receive your own stream of consciousness information if you want and so choose. And so with that being said, I really invite you to take this time and take this opportunity to relax along with me, be open to your own information if you would like, and just really spend this time thinking about you and your energy and your emotions, or perhaps the energy and emotions of those that you love that you would like to understand better who may be grieving. I would like to say as well that grief is a funny thing because there is no right or wrong way to grieve. Everyone is going to grieve differently. Even people within the same family or the same apparent situation are going to grieve differently. So I want you to first respect whatever the grieving process is, looks like, and feels like for you or for your loved one. If you are facing all of this, and if you are thinking about loved ones that you know who are going through grief, also take into consideration the language that you use and the way that you treat them during the holiday season. We're so used to saying happy holidays, happy birthday, Merry Christmas, whatever it is, but that may not be appropriate language for everyone and every situation if people are freshly or actively grieving, or if you know them and you can see that even if the grief is not fresh for them, it may, or for you, it may be something that comes back around during the holidays. This is something that I've found a lot in my own life and in my work with many different types of clients, because even though a passing or a grievance may be quite old, a lot of people tend to feel it more during this point of the holidays or during days or seasons of the year that are significant to them and the person or the thing or the people that they have lost. And so bear that in mind in terms of understanding that this may not be a happy time of year for everyone. And if it is for you, that's great and wonderful. And if you're going through grief and it is a happy time of year for you, that's wonderful too. Understand that whatever emotions that you have or that you're feeling are nothing to feel guilty about. That's the most important thing to me. Dropping the guilt, judgment, and shame that we have upon ourselves and upon others. There should be no expectations around grief, because grief is something that needs to be processed in the body, in the mind, in the heart, and in the spirit. So we could be processing on many different layers at the same time, or some people do their processing on one level completely and then move to the next. So what do I mean by that? Mentally, we can have a process with grief and grieving in terms of mentally accepting that a person or situation is no longer in our life. Then accepting it emotionally and on a heart level can be a whole nother thing. Then, processing it on a spiritual level. The spiritual level tells us that we never can really lose anything, that all energy transforms, that relationships, especially with loved ones in spirit, are still present if we want, need, and choose for them to be. But the spiritual self goes through its own process of grief as well, because it is an odd juxtaposition to spiritually know you're still connected with someone or something and no longer physically be connected with that. And then we have the process of the body as well. The nervous system tends to go through its own processes of grief or trauma, perhaps. It could be traumatic to lose people in certain ways. Our nervous system can get stuck replaying certain scenarios over and over again or be very easily triggered. And then, of course, all of these processing ways can interplay. So every single person is going to deal with this processing differently, and it can take years, or for some people an entire lifetime, to go through the complete process, depending on their level of awareness, depending on their level of support, and depending on their level of commitment to the type of healing work that will support them in the processing and healing of that grief. Now, some people never truly finish grieving or moving on until they are reunited with loved ones on the other side, but that's going to be individual too. I don't particularly see that as a healthy thing, although it is a common thing. And I do believe that we are moving more into the times when we are having so much in the way of spiritual and mindfulness and mental health awareness that hopefully more and more people can move out of that way of constantly needing to grieve and do their processing so that, yes, they may still miss someone and wish they were there, but no longer have to have a part of their body or soul stuck on any level or in any way in active phases of grief or in the limiting kind of glass ceiling ways of grief that sometimes we can implement upon our own lives and upon our own soul. And absolutely no judgment if you see that that's something that you or a loved one has done, but it is a part of my work and a passion of mine to help people see that we can move past that stuckness and we can develop other ways of relationship through the spiritual that can hopefully help us to no longer need to hold on to the grief and instead continue to feel our emotions, of course, as they come through, but write a new relationship with those things, those people that we have lost, to go in that place of the storyline of just losing them, if that makes sense, which I hope it does. I'm sure it will for some of you. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that, we go through this process as well, where sometimes we do keep ourselves stuck out of guilt, or we keep ourselves grieving out of guilt because we think, if we go into the good emotions again, does that mean that we're over not having the people there or the situation there anymore? And does it mean something negative in terms of how we felt about those people or those situations? Does it mean that they're not important to us anymore? And of course, all of these things go through on an unconscious or subconscious level. But in my experience, it doesn't mean that at all, or it doesn't have to mean that at all. We are very much capable of moving on and moving forward in life, without having to have that guilt or fear that says that if we move on or if we move forward, that means that we don't care about that loved one or situation anymore. That's not true from a spiritual perspective. In my experience with many different types of spirit, it's not true from their perspective either, because they see the bigger picture and they very much want us to live the lives we have while we have the chance to live them. But we try to put a definition from our human understanding and standpoint that says that they might be hurt if we continue to live. But realistically, from the perspective that they have and gain from the other side, they understand that it was soul contracted for them to pass when they did, and it was soul contracted for us to continue living. And I've really never come across someone who has blamed the people that are still here for moving on. Now, of course, they'll have their own emotions about it, but most of the time they're quite happy for us to continue living a life, and many of them take responsibility for the fact of putting new and positive situations in our life even after their passing. Something else to be aware of is the fact that in terms of holidays and in feeling grief or in missing those people or those loved ones or those situations during holidays, it's kind of unhealthy, in my opinion, to expect that holidays are going to be the same way when they're no longer around. We see this in many, many families. When the matriarchs or the patriarchs pass away, holidays change for the entire family. But really, when any person passes or leaves the family by way of divorce or breakup or something like that, which is also something to grieve, holidays are going to change. And we should, in my opinion, make space for the fact that we are going to grieve that. And some people try very hard to then cling on to tradition or making things the same. But in my opinion, it's an opportunity for us to recognize that all things change, and we can save ourselves a lot of heartache if we stop trying to make them look, or make holidays or experiences look the way that they did before the person passed. Now, by all means, if it brings you comfort to uphold traditions, and if you are capable of doing that without causing yourself more heartache or grief, by all means, uphold those traditions if it brings you joy. But I also want people to be aware of the fact that it doesn't always bring people joy to try to uphold those traditions and pretend like nothing's changed when almost everything has changed with that person or those people no longer being there. This is why we see families sometimes stop celebrating holidays or celebrate them in a completely different way. Maybe they always cooked a family meal, and then after a person's passing or after a situational change, they instead cater or go out to eat or go to the movies or something very different for them. And in my experience, pattern adjustment is really, really healthy, because patterns can keep us stuck and cycling. And of course, if we're cycling, there runs the risk that we would run into cycling into the same emotions of grief or missing them and feeling worse about the fact that those people or those situations are no longer here for us in the same way. So that's something to bear in mind when you're going about the process of planning or celebrating holidays, or if you're thinking about planning a holiday for or with someone else who is grieving. Do a check-in with yourself or with your loved ones and say, hey, let's just acknowledge that things are different this year, for whatever reason that is in your family or loved one group, and say, do we really still want to do the same thing that we've always done? Or what do we want to do? Is there a different way that we would like to celebrate this year? Perhaps, it's also a conversation to have in terms of what's possible this year. There may be economic restrictions on the family after a loved one's passing or after a particularly hard year, and it may warrant conversations of, hey, let's accept the fact that we may not be celebrating in the same way this year, but let's talk about how we can make the most of what we have, or do things that we want to do that will feel like celebration or honoring or joy to us. And I know that those conversations can be scary to have, but in my experience, it does save us more heartache and more grief and more grieving, and anything that we can do to heal our hearts rather than kind of continue to put them in that way or that monotonous way of feeling things more deeply that we may not necessarily need to feel anymore. Any direction that we can go in the steps towards healing rather than adding to our pain, I'm always for those ways. And it's a hard truth and a hard reality that sometimes trying to celebrate or trying to make the best of a situation, if it feels forceful to us or if it feels too soon, is not always the best thing to do, in my opinion. And so whatever feels right for you or for your family or loved one group, please trust that. And it may feel difficult to have the conversations saying that you just don't feel like celebrating this year or you just don't feel like celebrating in the same way, but you can save yourself a lot of heartache if you have the conversations rather than try to force yourself or a loved one into a situation, or rather than try to bypass and ignore the whole thing, in which case it usually causes more anxiety about not having the conversations. And this is where the idea also comes up about good grief. So if you are watching as well as listening, you'll see that I have Charlie Brown here on screen. This is a cartoon that I drew of Charlie Brown. And if you're familiar with Charlie Brown and Peanuts, you probably know his sort of catchphrase of good grief. And there's honestly a whole nother conversation to be had about the fact that this little boy is kind of constantly depressed and dealing with things in that pessimistic way. But this is the representation and the symbol that spirit usually brings through to me about this process of good grief. And everything that we've been talking about and channeling about up to this point is to understand that grief may not feel like a good thing, but the good way to grieve, or the way to have good grief, is to recognize all of these different things if and when you can and when you're ready to. And of course, please also with any support that you need, because of the fact that you can, in my experience, lighten the load of your grief by coming at it with knowledge, by coming at it with support, with understanding, and whenever possible, having open communication in a safe space way to make room for your feelings, and also make room for the fact that sometimes your feelings could change. So please also be understanding with yourself and or of loved ones who may be in this grieving process with a fresh wound, like we said, or who may just take their grief particularly hard as it cycles around again during the holidays, and be understanding with the fact that sometimes plans can change and sometimes people's feelings could change, and you or they can commit to something, can commit to hosting or to being at an event, and then just really not feel like it, and that's okay. You know, I know it can be difficult, as I said, to have those conversations, but the more we can be understanding with one another that sometimes we may not want to be at the event or be around a lot of people or even acknowledge the holiday or acknowledge it in the same ways that we always did, that understanding can be so helpful and can mean so much to people. Also be aware, like I said, of the language that we use. Not only saying happy holidays or whatever can sometimes be a little disrespectful or inconsiderate to people, but also consider the fact that questions such as, how are you? How's everything going? I know that I used to really fear and dread that question because sometimes you can be just keeping it together and be getting along, and then someone hits you with that question and suddenly you feel this urgency or this pressure to try to explain things, and all that stuff that you've been kind of fighting the current on can flood back to you. So get to know the people in your life and be considerate about your questions, and know that sometimes it's not going to feel the best for people to answer that how are you, how's everything going question, because you'll usually get one of two responses. You'll get an I'm fine, which is probably not their accurate answer, but they're feeling obligated to answer that. Or you'll get an overwhelmed answer, or actually there's probably three responses. You'll get an I'm fine, you'll get an overwhelmed, maybe word vomitous answer of just finally the dam breaking and letting loose on the answer to that, and you may not have been prepared to receive the full gravity or weight of that answer. Or the third thing is, the person may not be able to answer and they may just be overwhelmed, and you asking them that question at certain points may be helpful, but at other points may be pressurized. So this is really about knowing yourself and knowing the people that are in your life, and asking questions like that with reverence and respect, and only if and when we deem them appropriate and when we have considered that we have the time and space for their answer, whatever it is, and to be supportive in their answer, whatever it is. And also know if we're on the other side of that and we're getting those questions and we're feeling overwhelmed or comfortable and we're wanting to make others comfortable, by way of showing them that we're strong or that it's okay or that we're not a problem or a burden to them if we're grieving or going through things, know that you have the right to answer that question in the ways that feel appropriate to you. And it's never wrong to say, I don't really want to talk about it right now. And that's okay. Obviously we need to talk to people and we need to have safe space to open up to people. But if opening up is going to interfere with your personal or their personal grieving process, it's maybe not something to consider doing all the time. So that is my 2 cents as someone who's been on both sides of grieving. I also want to dispel a myth, if I can, while we're talking about good grief and grieving. As someone who's identified as a medium from my earliest memories, even though my work, more goes into the fields of energy healing and awareness and spiritual advising and teaching and things like that now, but as someone who's really always been in touch with spirit, there was this misconception that was always on me and other spiritual people like me that if we have a good relationship with spirit, whether we identify as a medium or not, people think that we kind of don't have the right to grieve or to miss our loved ones in the same way, because we know for sure that they're on the other side and we know for sure that we can still have and develop a relationship with them. In my experience, that's a very shameful and difficult and infringing way of looking at grief, because you may not be a medium, but you may have a really strong faith, or you may have a really strong relationship with your loved one and have made arrangements to have signs from each other while they're in spirit, or you may reach out to them or them reach out to you in dreams. And there's this idea that if we maintain connection, we somehow don't have the right to still feel grief because we know that they're safe. And that's just not true. Like I was talking about, we go through grief on many different levels, including on the physical level. And so, yes, it can help if we have a strong faith or have a strong relationship with spirit or the other side in any way that is relevant for us. But it does not mean that we get to bypass the grieving system. So I would like to put that myth to bed right now. And if there's any part of you, because I'm sure if you're here, you're quite spiritual and intuitive, and if there's any part of you that's felt guilty about feeling the things that you do or the ways that you do, while you know for sure that your loved ones are there for you, I hope that this will help to be a healing balm for you and a wave of acceptance and saying that it's okay to feel and process in whatever ways that you do, while still knowing that they're okay and having a relationship with them on the other side, because that's something that I know that I really needed to hear. And I know that people in my life wanted me to be there more for them during our periods of joint grief, because they didn't feel like they had a relationship with the other side, and they felt that I did, or they knew that I did because of who I was and what my gifts and abilities were. And so there was an aspect of people leaning on me, sometimes too much, which I know will be resonant for empaths as well, or kind of feeling like, well, you should just be able to handle it because you know for sure that they're okay, or you know that you can still talk to them, or I wish I had your gifts and abilities right now. And, that's just kind of a toxic and manipulative way of looking at things. And while people are very little of the time actually meaning that in a maliciously intentional way, it can still hurt. And so I hope that this channeling session will be out there for whoever is going through a similar situation like that and needs to hear this, and needs to hear that even if the people in your life don't understand why you're taking it hard or why you're going through the normal kind of bouts of grief, not that there really is a normal because it's ever changing for every situation, but I hope that you understand you have every right to feel your grief as much as you need to, no matter who you are, for as long as you need to, and in whatever ways you need to, until you are ready to move into the next phase of life. And if you are grieving anyone or anything, you are moving into a new phase of life. And that is something that we need to grieve too. We need to grieve the loss of life as it was in order to make way for the rebirth of life as it will be now, without those people or situations in our life. And that is a process for everyone. And so, my loves, with that, I'm gonna start the process of wrapping up this chat and channel session. I know we didn't go too much into periods of wintering, but we touched on it in ways that we weren't really addressing it directly. So periods of wintering can be like the season of winter that many of the holidays end up being in, here in the Northern Hemisphere at least. Or they can be any periods of life where you're going through this liminal space, where you're going through this phase where you can't really see the growth. Think of a forest or a lakeside in winter, right? Things can appear frozen, there can be frost, there's very little green, trees and plants and things can look dead on the surface, while underneath there's a lot of activity or stagnation waiting for that new season or that new phase of life to begin. And so these periods of wintering can happen coordinating with grief or during other parts of life as well. And our souls absolutely go through periods of this type of wintering where we've gone through a lot. Perhaps a lot has died in our life or in our attitudes or in our realities, our belief systems, and We're really in this in-between phase where we are taking a pregnant pause, we're waiting to be reborn, where that life is maybe brewing underneath the surface of the ice or underneath in the soil, waiting to revitalize those plants and trees and those appearance of dead parts of us. And it can be or feel like a dark night of the soul or a 0 point energy or phase in our life. And so if you are going through, or when you are going through periods of wintering, whether that is connected with a grief that you know about or not, I hope that you will think of this and think of this imagery as we've been discussing it, and remember that life is coming. Life is coming anew, that the season will shift and change. There is nothing permanent there that you don't allow to be permanent. And things can grow again, and things will grow again. And it's up to you in that moment to decide what you want to prune back and what you want to nurture and make way to grow anew in this next phase of your life. The imagery that Spirit is showing me right now is, if any of you are familiar with the 1990s version of The Secret Garden, where they go into this garden and it's wintertime and she's trying to see if the garden is dead or alive, and the gardener boy takes his knife and cuts the tree and says, "See, that's the wick. The wick is green." And even though the outside of the tree looks dead, the inside is quite alive and vibrant and getting ready to grow beautifully for the next season to come. So my wish and my hope and my prayer and intention for you is that if and when you're going through these periods of wintering, you think of that you find the ways to nurture your own wick and nurture your own inner garden, and trust the fact that life will bring about the circumstance for your next season to come, for things to birth anew, and for you to move on from holidays or life or grief as you knew it into a phase where you have developed a new relationship and a new definition of those things. Hopefully, if it's loved ones that you are grieving, you can develop a relationship with them as they are on the other side and define your relationship in a new way, so that it's no longer this kind of anchor tying you to the past that you still long for, or making you miss the future that never was, but is now an ally and a connection and a loved one in spirit that is rooting for you. Or even if it's a situation that you're grieving, that you go about the spiritual process and the mental health and mindfulness process to form a new understanding of why that thing or those things maybe never came to pass. Learn about yourself what you need to, and learn the ways to create the future that you want, even if it looks different than you once expected. So with that, I'm going to close out this chat and channel session. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you will continue to work with this energy. Feel free to listen again whenever you like. Take some more of your own stream of consciousness notes. As I said, I'm sure a lot has the potential to come through here for you in terms of little signs about your own healing and steps and phases and things that you can go through to make the most of this energy and put it to good use in your life or in a loved one's life. If you feel that this could be helpful to someone and you feel confident in the comfortability of that person to be able to receive it, I would love for you to share it with them or share it publicly on your pages. Remember that if you have liked this, it's really helpful if you like the video to let the algorithm know that this has helped you, and to bring you more content like this and to bring this content to others as well. If you would like to go further with this energy, I am available for energy healing. I do that on a consultation basis first. I like to build custom quantum containers to work with people. So you can find a contact for consult form in the description to contact me and see if we are a good fit to build you a energy healing or life and consciousness coaching container. I do also do single sessions, which do not include the energy healing, but which include reading and making other connections for you, such as quantum and Akashic Records readings and sessions. You can find that as well as the ways to contact me and more on my website, Damsel Designs, DAMCL Designs.com. All of that is also linked in the description. If you are not a subscriber here already, I would be so honored if you became a subscriber so that you can be notified of future chat and channel sessions. There is also a chat and channel session playlist link in the description so you can catch up on other timeless topics that may be helpful to you. And if you would like to support the channel, if you feel called and drawn and able to do so, no pressure. I do also have donation links through paypal.me/DeesEnlightenedEdits and the links in the description below. All amounts are appreciated and helpful to keep free and public works such as this channeling up and going strong. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to be here today and work on these aspects of your spirituality and your connection and your healing. And I hope that if you need other help, such as mental health support, you also find and seek that as well. Know that there is no shame in doing so, and it takes nothing away from your spirituality to get all the help and support that you need and can find in whichever ways are best for you or a loved one. And with that being said, I wish you nothing but the best. Again, I appreciate you for being here. I hope that this has brought you some peace and comfort in your healing journey, and I pray that you find your own ways of good grief and of enjoying life as it wants to present itself to you now. Be blessed with love, light, and light codes. Love, Danielle. #Damsel at DeesEnlightenedEdits of DamselDesigns.com.